Hi everyone, this is Neil. So in this video today, we're going to look at the final part of your PGO2 assignment, which is the essay bit. So we're looking at the top of this slide, we're looking at those first three learning outcomes and the essay, which is about a critical evaluation of a range of models, and the suggested word count for this is about 2,500 words. So let's just have a little look at those learning outcomes in a bit more detail. So you have to show all three in the assignment. And I'm going to unpack them for you a little bit. So the first one is to critically evaluate a range of pedagogic models and their application in the classroom. Now, all three learning outcomes basically have the same structure, so let's get really clear about this. The first thing is we have to be writing about, don't forget that the module is called Linking Theory and Practice, right? So we have to be writing about certain ideas, models, theories, however you want to think of them, that you've actually put into practice. It's got to be things that you've actually used, because what we're trying to do is we're trying to bring together your understanding of the theory, your ability to put it into practice, and your ability to think critically about what happened when you tried to do that. Okay, so it's got to be things that you've actually used in practice and you have interesting case studies that you can write about in your assignment. The other thing is that the verb here is evaluate. The verb phrase is critically evaluate. So you can't just write about some theories and models that you've used and then kind of say what happened. That's kind of what you did in the first assignment, right, PGO1. We're moving on now. What you're really being asked to show is that you have a well-informed opinion and you can make a judgment about the usefulness or non-usefulness of the theories in relationship to your own teaching. What we're really looking for is something which is kind of evidenced by what happened in class, where you're able to say, right, when I try to put this theory into practice, this is what I see as its strengths for me, or its weaknesses for me, or this is how I think I need to adapt it so that it works better for my teaching in my context. So we're really looking for your thoughtful opinion about the theory that you've used, backed up by evidence of what happened when you used it in practice, and that's really the heart of this assignment, okay? So the first outcome, you're asked to look at pedagogic models, so in other words, anything to do with teaching and learning. The second outcome you'll see is structured in exactly the same way, and here we're looking at models and practices relating to feedback and assessment. It can be formative feedback, it can be summative feedback. That's absolutely fine. Same for assessment, formative or summative assessment, or indeed ipsative assessment if you want to write about that. And the third one is creating a positive and effective learning environment in different settings with diverse learners. Now, I think, to be honest, that these ILOs are a little bit overwritten when they start talking about a range of. You've only got 2,500 words. You have to cover all three of these outcomes. It's quite tight. So as long as you touch on each one and you describe even at least two different things in each area, or one area you only talk about one approach and you put in a couple of approaches in the other areas, I'm going to be completely happy with that. You're going to get marks for depth. You're not going to get marks for breadth. So don't try and write about too many different things, and honestly, that's absolutely fine. The essay title asks you to write an essay in which you make an explicit claim for your achievement of those three outcomes through writing a critical evaluation of a range of models and theories in relation to your own practice. This is what we've already said. You have to write about things that you've done in your own practice and then be able to come up with your opinion about these models now that you've actually used them yourself. Just going back to that first line, the part about making an explicit claim is generally what people write about in this assignment. Is they maybe discuss a couple of case studies of different things that they've done in their teaching, or a couple of critical incidents from their teaching this year. You need to say with each of these case studies, these critical incidents, explicitly in one sentence, which of the learning outcomes you are addressing at any given point in your assignment. So if I wanted to start writing about something I'd done in one of my classes, I would have to say this is addressing outcome 1 because it's about pedagogy, and outcome 3 because it's about getting the group right. So even if it's completely obvious and you think, well, obviously it's part of my assignment, it's about assessment, you still need to put that sentence in which says, this is me addressing outcome number 2, it's the one on assessment, so that it's really, really clear, okay? Now, in terms of your focus, you do not have many words, so you need a really clear focus. But the good thing is that I think the ILOs overlap. And what very often works well, and I know I've said this to lots of people with whom I've had tutorials already, is to choose 2 areas of your teaching to focus on and ensure that those 2 areas cover all 3 ILOs. What quite typically happens is people will pick one area which covers 2 of the ILOs and then just knock the third ILO off by discussing a different teaching situation or a different class. So for example, if I was writing about using peer feedback in class, what I could say, depending on how I write about it, is I could say, okay, this is about pedagogy because I was using peer feedback as a teaching technique. Or I could say, well, this is clearly about feedback because it's, peer feedback, that's a form of feedback. Or I could say, actually, I want to talk about peer feedback in relationship to describing how I tried to create a positive learning environment, because if the learning environment wasn't positive, students weren't going to be able to give each other any feedback in an effective way. So all three ILOs are kind of potentially there within that topic, but I just need to very explicitly say what I'm addressing in the essay. Okay. There's sort of two ways of thinking about how we link theory and practice. The first is perhaps more obvious, and we started this earlier in the PG Cert, which is we're quite good at starting with a theory or a new idea or approach to teaching, and using that as a kind of lens through which we look at our practice and plan to improve it. It's like, oh, here's a new idea. How can I use it? Oh, I can try this in class and do this that's different from what I've done before, and then you give it a go and see whether it works. But the journey works in reverse as well, because we can also think about our practice and use that as a lens through which we then examine the theory and evaluate it and say, well, okay, I tried this out in my class. Did it work? Did it not work? Why was that? What does that tell me about how useful this theory is to me and in my teaching context? And the point of this assignment is that we're asking you to write dialogue that goes in both directions. Okay, so again, we're linking theory and practice, but in both directions, how we go from theory to improved practice, and how we use our practice and our evaluation of our practice to think critically about how useful the theories are. Let's just take a moment before I get into suggesting a way of writing this, just to make sure that we're happy about this phrase, critical evaluation, critically evaluate. Because the task is that we need to write, this is what you're asked to do, write a critical evaluation of your theories in relation to your experience of putting them into practice. So we need to be very clear about what critical evaluation is and what it looks like on the page, because otherwise it's just like kind of some education bullshit language kind of little expression, isn't it? And I would suggest that in really good essays we'll show three elements which together add up to forming critical evaluation. So there will be an element of analysis, an element of, well, what happened when I tried this out and what's my evidence? What worked, what didn't work? An element of evaluation. How successful was my teaching when I tried to use this model? And why was that my hypothesis and my best alternative hypothesis as to why this was? And then an element of criticism, which is, okay, now that I've used the theory, what do I see as the strengths and weaknesses of it? Now that I've used it in my own specific context. So you're going to have all three of these elements, an element of analysis, an element of evaluation, and an element of criticism. Which leads us to the question, okay, so what's a good process of achieving this? How might you get those three elements into an essay in a really effective way? Now, there's lots of different ways you can do it, and I'm going to suggest 5 things that you might want to think about at the end of these slides, and you'll use some of them, but not all of them. But I think as an overall approach, this works really well. I like this approach because actually, in reality, it's what I do all the time in order to try to improve my own teaching. It's kind of the thought process I go through, whether I'm writing an assignment or not. So I'm mainly offering this to you in a way, not only because it's a way of structuring your essay, but because it's a way of actually thinking, once you finish the PG Cert, in ways which are going to help you keep on improving your teaching anyway. But it does give us a very good framework for writing, because it lets us write analytically, answering those questions, what happened, what's my evidence, and it helps us write critically and evaluatively, why did this happen, what have I learned, what's good about this theory, what's not good about this theory. And really what we're doing is we're following Bruner's stages of learning effectively in this. So the first thing that we write about is we would write about some theory or some idea that resonated with us and suggested to us something we could do to improve our practice. Now, don't forget, Sussex assignments, they're going to be looking for between 20 and 30 references in your assignment from as many different sources as possible. This is obviously a place where you can get those in because you're showing that you know where the theories come from. So obviously this is part of the essay where you would be alluding to your reading. If you've seen the theory written in more than one place, if it's an idea that comes from more than one place, that's great because you can bring in extra reading. But this is where you bring your reading in. Okay. And then the second part, and now we are beginning to think in a critical way, is to go, well, most of these theories that we look at are quite general. So whenever I decide to take any of these theories on board, I have to immediately, the first thing I've got to do is figure out how am I going to use this in a way which is meaningful for me. So we need to have some understanding here of your teaching context. Which would be things like what level students have you got, how many students have you got, what kind of topic are you teaching, is it declarative knowledge, is it functioning knowledge, all those things that we know are really important for our teaching context. So you need to describe a little bit or discuss a little bit, how did you think about putting the theory into practice in the way that you thought was going to be the best fit for your teaching context? I'll talk about that a little bit more later on. But I would say, just as a side note, really, whenever I try and learn any new theory, the point at which I begin to understand it is what happens when I try to put it into practice. We're now into a kind of a very standard cold evaluation cycle. So as I put my theory into practice, I'm going to look for evidence to show me what's working well and what isn't working well. This is the analysis part of your assignment. Yes, so you tried it out in class. What happened? What worked well? What didn't work well? What is your evidence for that? If you can triangulate evidence between your observations, feedback from students, maybe something that an observer saw, something that you read that resonated with what was going on, that's absolutely excellent. But we need evidence there, and at the very least, we need evidence based on what you were observing. And don't forget, that's like video camera evidence. If I'd been in that classroom, what would I have seen? If you say, oh yeah, it worked great, what exactly would I have seen that would tell me that it really was working great? Okay. Then we need to go into the evaluation part, which is, okay, so why? Why do I think this was happening? What can I learn from this? And I really like it, and we've discussed this in class. If you show your thinking by showing what's your best hypothesis, this is the best reason I think I understand for why this happened. But if I'm wrong, here's my best alternative hypothesis as well. And we've said, haven't we, quite a lot, that classrooms are messy, complicated places, or if you're not writing this assignment in relationship to your teaching, but in relationship to your other professional work, I can guarantee that everything that we do, say as a manager or a leader or working with students in other ways, there are always so many factors going on. You will always be able to come up with a hypothesis and an alternative hypothesis. And you end your assignment with your two evaluations, that the evaluation of yourself. Right, now that I've tried to put it into practice, how effectively do I think I did that? Did I get anything wrong? Did I forget anything that was really important? And then the main crux of the essay, which is, okay, now that I've used it, what do I see as the strengths and weaknesses of the theory? How might I improve it? This part's really good. That part doesn't work for me so well. And okay, how might I adapt it to better fit my context and needs? We started off by saying all of these theories are a little bit general, and we need to think about them in relationship to our own context. So did I make those decisions in the best way? Could I adapt and change the theory in a better way that's going to make it fit with my context in a more successful fashion? Now, in terms of linking theory and practice, I'm going to end by offering you 5 different ways in which you can think about that and think about working these into your assignment at different places, right? You probably won't use all 5, but have a think about which ones of these are going to be the best places where you can really link and contrast and compare theory and practice in ways that are meaningful for your essay and the way in which you've thought about writing about it. So the first way is just directly comparing and contrasting theory and experience. So you can talk about things like, how do the ideas I'm reading seem to agree with or align with my experience? If I'm reading something that really resonates with my experience, I think, yes, that really works for me as well. So you can discuss that. Or you might read something and you think, actually, that really goes against my experience. And there are different reasons why that might be. It might be that you could change your experience and make it more effective, or it might be that the theory doesn't apply to you, whatever. But you can think about things where it goes against. And even better, can you find a variety of reading, maybe some of which goes with your experience and some of which goes against it, and then you can really discuss that. I wrote a paper recently which was about students giving each other peer feedback, and in one context it had worked, and in another context it hadn't worked. And for me that was very interesting, so I was trying to figure out why that was. And there was plenty of reading to support this idea that it doesn't always work, because there were research articles where peer feedback had been highly effective, and there were research articles where peer feedback had not been effective at all. And by looking at those, I was trying to figure out what seemed to be the context in those pieces of research that resonated against the context where I'd found it had worked and not worked in different contexts. Now, the research wasn't trying to understand those contexts, but I was trying to pick it out of the research because it was something I was interested in. So that works really well. And figuring this out, obviously, why I can find reading that says, yes, this is a great idea, and I can equally find reading that says, oh, this is a terrible idea, and it all seems to be quite well researched. Figuring that out will probably give me some quite important insights and great material to write about and help me understand it in my own context. So one approach you can take is just directly comparing and contrasting theory and experience. The other place we can bring theory in is using theory to help inform your planning and teaching decisions. And we've been doing a lot of this through the PG Cert. So things like, what ideas do I get from my reading, which will help me decide what to do next, what to change, what to improve, what to try that I haven't tried before. So I'm getting ideas, and they're immediately feeding into my professional practice. But because we're looking for the critical evaluation, we need a little bit more thinking here rather than just saying, oh, I just got this idea, great, I decided to use it. And I think the most important thing to think about is, okay, so what's excited me? Why have I picked up on this idea? Why do I think that the changes that this idea suggests to me are going to work or are going to be positive? And again, linking theory and practice, you can come at that from two angles. It's like, okay, so what from my experience suggests that the changes would work? Have I had an observation conversation which said this might be a good idea? Have I seen someone else teaching using this idea and it worked for them? So what is there experientially that suggests to you the changes would work? But also, what from your reading suggests the changes would work? Have you read about case studies where people have used it, or have you read about this idea from different writers and they all recommend it? So you think, oh, well, actually, there's probably something in this, okay? But again, trying to think really critically, let's not be kind of Pollyanna-ish about this. Is there anything that might cast doubt on your change? You think, well, I'm 80% confident this is going to work, but there might be this confounding factor. So is there anything you want to say about that? So that's the second way you can think about theory and practice, the ways in which we use the theory to help inform our planning and teaching decisions. As I say, you're not going to use all 5 of these approaches. I'm just offering you different ways in which at relevant parts of your essay you can really be doing the linking of theory and practice together in a way which is going to allow you to have a critical discussion. Because don't forget, the whole point of this assignment is we want to see what's been going on inside your head. We don't just want to see what you've been doing as a teacher. We want to see what are the thought processes that have underlain this, and really that's the most important thing in the assignment. Another way in which we can use our reading and theory is after we've done something and we're trying to understand why did that work or why didn't that work, we might very well be able to read something which is going to help us hypothesize about why something has happened. So, what ideas do I get from my reading which will help me explain to myself or hypothesize about why something I'm observing is happening? This worked really, really well. Can I read something which says, well, this has probably worked well because of X, Y, and Z, or it didn't work at all because of X, Y, and Z? And remember, complicated situations in our professional lives, we want our best hypothesis and our best alternative hypothesis. If you can find different readings, one of which suggests your best hypothesis and one of which suggests your best alternative hypothesis, chances are you're going to be writing at a very high level, because that's something I often see in really successful essays. Okay, this really is probably the one that you're going to have to, well, no, not probably, this is the one that you're going to have to bring into your assignment, because this is the whole thing about critically evaluating the theories. This is where we use our own experience to critique the theory, and we go, okay, in the light of my experience, what do I think about the theories and ideas I've been trying to implement? So obviously this is bringing theory and practice together in a very direct way. What do I see as the strengths and weaknesses of the theories now that I've used them? Given what I know about my own teaching context, how can I adapt and improve the theory to make it more relevant and more useful to me? This approach you're going to have to get in your assignment, and put it pretty front of stage, actually, because this is something we're really going to want to see. If you're feeling fancy, the final way in which you can actually evaluate some of the theories that you've used is actually think about some of the methodological considerations underpinning the things that you've been reading. So if you've been reading an author saying, oh, this is a good thing to do, a good question to ask ourselves always is, okay, so what evidence has this person given to support their theories? How well do I think the evidence has been generated by them? If I think the evidence has been generated by them really successfully, I'm probably more likely to buy into the worth of the theory. Although even then, I'd be looking at the context from which they've generated their evidence and thinking, is that context similar to mine, or is that context so different from mine? Maybe they've done it with primary school children, that I need to think very kind of carefully and a bit sceptically about, well, okay, it worked great for 7-year-olds. Is it going to work for my kind of learners, or am I going to have to make a major change? So how well have they generated their evidence? How well have they interpreted their evidence? You know, people write articles, they say, here's my evidence, here's my interpretation. You might read it and think, I accept that you've generated evidence there quite successfully, but I don't agree with your interpretation of that evidence whatsoever. And if you've got ideas around that, putting this in your assignment again is a really good way of showing your thinking. And it might be actually that there's something from the way in which they've generated and discussed their evidence, because of course we're putting that in our assignments as well, aren't we? We're saying what happened, why did it work, why do I think this is? So we're doing the same thing, we're generating and discussing evidence. Have they come up with ways of generating evidence that's maybe better than what I've used myself, and I can reflect on that? Or do I think my way of generating evidence is better than theirs, and I can reflect on that? And is there anything I can steal from them methodologically? So that's kind of like a final nice little layer of icing on top of the cake that's often a really good way to just put that extra bit of thought in that can raise an assignment to the next level. Okay, so lots of ideas there. You won't want to use all of them, but hopefully thinking about which parts of this are going to be the things that you want to incorporate into your own assignment should really keep you on the right track. Good.